The rain came down in sheets the night the city learned that something was deeply wrong. Not because rain was unusual for Baltimore, but because it seemed to wash the streets, clean of the noise people had learned to trust, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence that made footsteps sound louder and secrets feel heavier. And in that silence, a young dock worker named Elias Mercer vanished on his walk home. A disappearance that at first looked like another small tragedy swallowed by a city that had learned to keep moving. Until weeks later, when a fisherman pulled a rusted metal drum from the harbor and the smell told a story long before the lid was pried open. Because inside were not just bones, but evidence of planning, restraint, and patience. The kind that belongs to someone who watches, waits, and learns. And as detectives followed the thin trail back through shipping logs and abandoned warehouses, they discovered that Elias was only the most recent name in a quiet list. Men and women from the edges of the city whose lives overlapped in small, forgettable ways, night shifts, cash jobs. No close family people who could disappear without alarms being raised. And what made the case truly unsettling was not the violence, which was methodical rather than chaotic, but the intention behind it. Because each victim had been stripped of identifying items except one small object left, carefully in a pocket or tucked beside remains. A token that seemed meaningless until a junior analyst noticed the pattern. Realizing that each item corresponded to a closed investigation from years earlier, cases dismissed for lack of evidence, crimes that had left someone angry and unheard. And slowly a picture formed of a killer who believed he was correcting the record, delivering justice where the system had failed. A man who studied police procedure with obsessive care and mirrored it, filing his own silent reports in the dark. And as pressure mounted, the city's leadership demanded quick answers while the detectives wrestled with a suspect who did not fit the usual profile, because he left no forensic signature beyond the bare minimum and avoided technology almost entirely, moving through neighborhoods like a ghost, relying on routines older than cameras and databases. And when a break finally came, it arrived not through science, but through memory. An aging clerk at the courthouse who recognized one of the tokens as something she had handled decades ago. A trinket submitted into evidence in a murder trial that collapsed when a key witness recanted. And that memory led investigators to the witness himself. Now living under a different name in a narrow row house, a man who confessed under pressure that he had lied because he was afraid, and that the person he feared was not the defendant, but a quiet court stenographer who had watched the trial with an intensity that made people uneasy. A man named Arthur Bell, who vanished shortly after the acquittal and left behind a life so carefully dismantled it was as if he had planned to disappear all along. And as detectives traced Bell's past, they found a childhood marked by instability, a mother who trusted the system and paid for it, a brother lost to a crime that was never solved, and years spent close enough to justice to see its flaws, but powerless to change them. Years that hardened into a philosophy where process mattered more than mercy. And when they finally located Bell, it was not in some dramatic confrontation, but in a derelict printing shop he had converted into a living space. Walls lined with meticulous notes, timelines, and copies of police reports annotated in a neat hand, a shrine not to violence, but to order, and Bell did not resist arrest, instead expressing a calm certainty that what he had done would one day be understood, that he had chosen victims who had escaped accountability and given them a trial they could not avoid. And the city struggled with that narrative, because while the law condemned his actions without hesitation, the public conversation became complicated. Talk shows and editorials debating whether the failures exposed by the case mattered as much as the crimes themselves. Families of victims torn between relief that answers had finally come and horror at the means. And as the trial unfolded, Bell refused a traditional defense, insisting on representing himself so he could explain, calmly and in detail, how each killing corresponded to a gap in justice, how he believed society needed a mirror held up to its blind spots. And though the jury ultimately returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, sentencing him to life without parole, the case did not end there, because it forced reforms in evidence handling, witness protection, and cold case review. Reforms that came too late for those already lost, but promised a different future. And years later, when the harbor had long since swallowed the memory of that rusted drum and new crimes occupied the headlines, people still spoke quietly about the Bell case as a reminder that the most dangerous crimes are sometimes born not from chaos, but from a cold conviction that the rules no longer apply. A conviction that grows in the spaces where trust erodes and silence becomes permission, leaving behind a lesson as heavy as the rain that first night: that justice neglected does not disappear. It waits, reshapes itself, and returns in forms no one can control.